You want us to what? Admiral Cathax's crystalline appendages vibrated with poorly concealed amusement as he regarded the tiny minnow diplomat before him. Train with humans, repeated Ambassador Finley, her translucent fins quivering slightly but her voice remaining steady. We believe an exchange program would be mutually beneficial. The crystalline being's laughter reverberated through the chamber, sending ripples through the holographic displays. The Minnow Collective requesting to train with humans? This must be some sort of elaborate joke. You're already the weakest spacefaring race in the Galactic Alliance. Why would you want to associate with those primitive Deathworlders? Finley's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with determination. Because, Admiral, sometimes the best teachers are those who understand what it means to be underestimated. That exchange took place exactly 5 cycles ago. Now, as I watch the Minnow Defense Fleet execute a perfect pincer movement against the Kraxthor invasion force, I can't help but appreciate the delicious irony of the situation. My name is Dr. Marcus Wells, and I've had the privilege of being the human liaison to the Minnow Collective for the past 5 years. Let me tell you how the smallest fish in the galaxy learned to swim with sharks. When I first arrived on Aquarius Prime, the Minnow homeworld, I wasn't sure what to expect. Their entire civilization existed in vast underwater cities. Their technology adapted to function in the crushing depths of their oceanic planet. The minnow themselves were beautiful creatures, roughly the size of dolphins, with translucent bodies that displayed an ever-shifting array of bioluminescent patterns, and delicate fins that could detect the slightest changes in pressure or movement. They were also, as Admiral Cathax so eloquently put it, considered the weakest spacefaring race in the Galactic Alliance. Their natural pacifism, combined with their relatively fragile physical form, made them easy targets for more aggressive species. They had managed to survive thus far through a combination of diplomatic skill and advanced stealth technology, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before someone decided to test their defenses. That's where humans came in. The first thing you need to understand, I remember telling the Minnow High Council during our initial meeting, is that humans didn't become apex predators on Earth through strength alone. We were never the biggest, fastest, or strongest. We succeeded because we learned to adapt, to use our environment, and most importantly, to work together. Council Elder Ripple's patterns shifted to display curiosity. But your species is renowned for its physical resilience and combat prowess. The stories we hear are mostly exaggerated, I interrupted with a smile. Yes, we're tough by galactic standards, but that's because Earth is a death world. We had to evolve to survive there. The important thing is what we did with that survival instinct. The training program we developed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. We started by teaching the minnows something they already knew intimately: the power of water. Your entire civilization is based around fluid dynamics, I explained to a group of minnow military strategists. You understand better than anyone how pressure and movement work in 3 dimensions. Now imagine applying that knowledge to space combat. The results were revolutionary. The minnow began adapting their ships to mimic the movement patterns of marine life from Earth. Massive capital ships would move like whale sharks, slow but unstoppable, while smaller vessels darted about like schools of fish, confusing enemy targeting systems. They even developed a new form of shield technology based on the principle of water pressure distribution. But the real breakthrough came when we introduced them to human military history, particularly guerrilla warfare and asymmetric combat tactics. The key, I told Commander Splash during one of our strategy sessions, is to make your perceived weaknesses work for you. Everyone expects the minnow to run and hide. Use that expectation against them. The minnow took to these lessons with an enthusiasm that surprised even me. They began incorporating deception and misdirection into their military doctrine, using their natural stealth abilities in ways that would make Sun Tzu proud. Their ships would appear to retreat, only to lead pursuing enemies into carefully prepared ambushes. They developed new technologies that turned their bioluminescence into weapons, creating massive holographic displays that could confuse and disorient enemy vessels. The training wasn't just about combat, though. We taught them human sports and games, especially team-based activities that required coordination and strategy. Water polo became a particular favorite, with modified rules to account for their natural abilities. These games helped them develop better spatial awareness and tactical thinking, skills that would prove invaluable in real combat situations. But perhaps the most important lesson we taught them was confidence. You know what's funny? I said to Ambassador Finley one day, as we watched a minnow training squadron perform maneuvers. Humans have a saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Her patterns shifted to show amusement. I don't know what a dog is, but I believe I understand the sentiment. The minnow began to carry themselves differently. Their natural grace remained, but now it was accompanied by a quiet assurance that came from knowing they could defend themselves if needed. Other species started to notice the change, though few understood its significance. Then came the Kraxthor invasion. The Kraxthor were notorious pirates and raiders, known for targeting seemingly weak civilizations and stripping them of resources. They must have thought the minnow would be easy prey. They were wrong. The first wave of Kraxthor ships encountered no resistance as they entered the Aquarius system. They probably thought the minnow were following their usual pattern of retreat and hiding. They didn't realize they were swimming right into a trap. The minnow fleet had positioned themselves in a three-dimensional formation that mimicked the hunting patterns of Earth's ocean predators. As the Kraxthor pressed deeper into the system, minnow ships emerged from hiding spots among asteroids and gas giant rings, cutting off their escape routes. The battle that followed was nothing short of spectacular. The Kraxthor found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Minnow ships moved with perfect coordination, like schools of fish evading a predator, except in this case, they were the hunters. Their new shield technology proved its worth, absorbing enemy fire while their own weapons, modified to work like the pressure jets of deep-sea creatures, tore through the Kraxthor's defenses. The pirates' attempts to retreat were cut off by carefully positioned squadrons that had been waiting invisibly in the system's debris fields. When the dust settled, the Kraxthor fleet was in ruins, and the minnow hadn't lost a single ship. News of the battle spread quickly through the Galactic Alliance. The footage, showing the graceful but lethal dance of the minnow fleet, became a sensation. Suddenly, the weakest race in the galaxy didn't seem so weak anymore. Admiral Cathax himself came to Aquarius Prime to present a formal commendation from the Alliance Military Council. I couldn't help but notice his crystalline appendages weren't vibrating with amusement this time. "I must admit," he said during the ceremony, "we have all greatly underestimated both the minnow and the humans. The combination of your species' natural abilities with human tactical doctrine has produced something truly remarkable." Ambassador Finley's patterns showed both pride and humility as she responded. "We simply learned what humans have known for millennia, that true strength comes not from size or natural weapons, but from intelligence, adaptation, and cooperation." The success of the human minnow training program has led to some interesting developments in galactic politics. Several other species have approached Earth about starting similar exchange programs. There's even talk of establishing a permanent multi-species training academy. But perhaps the most significant change has been in how the galaxy views both humans and the minnow. Humans are no longer seen as just primitive Deathworlders, but as valuable teachers and allies. And the minnow? Well, let's just say no one calls them the weakest race anymore. As I prepare to return to Earth after my 5-year assignment, I can't help but feel proud of what we've accomplished. The minnow have proven that with the right training and mindset, any species can become formidable. They've shown the galaxy that true strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to change the rules of engagement. Commander Splash summed it up perfectly during our farewell ceremony. Humans taught us that being underestimated is not a weakness, it's an advantage. And now, thanks to that lesson, we'll never be underestimated again. Looking out at the minnow fleet performing one last demonstration, their ships moving through space with all the grace and deadly precision of a pod of hunting orcas, I can't help but smile. The galaxy's smallest fish have learned to swim with sharks, and they've become something even more impressive in the process. They've become themselves, but stronger. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. "You did what?" I stared at Commander Splash, trying to process what I'd just heard through the quantum comlink. "We may have accidentally started a revolution." The minnow commander's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with what I'd learned to recognize as embarrassment, mixed with pride. "Among the hive minds of the Nexus Cluster." I pinched the bridge of my nose, grateful that the 5 years I'd spent as human liaison had taught me to expect the unexpected from our aquatic allies. Okay, start from the beginning. It had been 6 months since I'd returned to Earth, taking up a position at the newly established Interspecies Training Academy in Auckland. The minnow's success had indeed sparked a wave of interest in human military doctrine, though not quite in the way anyone had expected. But this was something else entirely. Commander Splash's patterns shifted to their storytelling configuration, something they'd picked up from humans. It started as a routine diplomatic mission. The hive minds requested a demonstration of our new combat techniques. The hive minds of the Nexus Cluster were one of the more unusual species in the Galactic Alliance. Imagine if bees evolved into a spacefaring civilization. but each hive maintained its own collective consciousness while being part of a larger network. They were respected for their efficiency and organization, but also known for their rigid social structure and resistance to change. The minnow delegation had been invited to showcase their new capabilities, partly as a diplomatic gesture and partly because the hive minds were curious about how such a traditionally passive species had managed to defeat the Kraxthor raiders. What no one expected was how the demonstration would affect the younger hive colonies. The worker drones were watching our precision maneuvers, Splash continued, and something just clicked. They saw how we coordinated our movements, how each individual contributed to the greater whole while maintaining autonomy. It was like showing a bird raised in a cage that it could fly wherever it wanted. The implications hit me like a freight train. You showed a hive mind species that hierarchy isn't the only way to achieve perfect coordination. Exactly. Splash's patterns rippled with excitement. The younger colonies started experimenting with our methods. Instead of rigid command structures, they began developing fluid, adaptive organizations. The older hives tried to suppress it, but you can't unring that bell, I finished, already imagining the ripple effects throughout the Nexus cluster. The situation had escalated quickly. The younger hives, inspired by the minnow's example, began demanding more autonomy within their collective. They weren't trying to break away entirely. They still valued their connected consciousness, but they wanted the freedom to experiment, to evolve. The conservative elder hives, predictably, saw this as a threat to their entire way of life. Tensions escalated, and now the Nexus cluster was teetering on the brink of civil war. We need your help, Marcus. Splash's patterns showed genuine concern. The elder hives are blaming us, and by extension, humans, for destabilizing their society. But the younger hives are reaching out for support. They want to learn more about how to balance individual initiative with collective action. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. So the species that everyone thought was too weak to matter has now triggered a social revolution in one of the most stable civilizations in the galaxy. All because you got good at coordinating your fleet movements. The High Council is divided on how to proceed, Splash admitted. Some want to distance ourselves from the situation. Others feel we have a responsibility to help. What would humans do? That was a loaded question if I ever heard one. Human history was full of examples of both intervention and non-intervention in other cultures' internal conflicts, with mixed results at best. But this situation was unique. We weren't dealing with competing ideologies so much as an entire species grappling with the concept of evolutionary social change. First things first, I said, falling back on my diplomatic training. We need to understand exactly what the younger hives want. Are they looking for complete independence, or just more flexibility within their existing structure? Splash's patterns shifted to show mild amusement. They've actually been quite clear about that. They want to maintain their hive connections, but operate more like... What was that human military unit you told us about? The one that inspired our new tactical doctrine? The Navy SEALs? I asked, remembering how the minnow had been fascinated by the concept of small, highly trained teams that could operate independently while still coordinating with larger forces. Yes. They want to be like that. Connected but autonomous. They're calling it the new way. Over the next few hours, Splash and I developed a plan. The minnow would offer to mediate between the elder and younger hives, using their own transformation from a purely passive to a more assertive species as an example of how change didn't have to mean losing one's essential nature. Meanwhile, I would work through diplomatic channels on Earth to get approval for a special training program. If the younger hives wanted to learn about balancing individual initiative with collective action, who better to teach them than the species that had turned that balance into an art form? There's just one potential problem. Splash's patterns showed hesitation. The elder hives have begun mobilizing their defense fleets. They're claiming it's just a precaution, but they're positioning themselves to suppress the younger colonies by force if necessary. I finished grimly. How much time do we have? Best estimate? 2 Earth months before the situation becomes critical. I nodded, already mentally composing messages to various military and diplomatic contacts. Then we better work fast. The last thing the galaxy needs is a civil war in the Nexus cluster. Agreed. Though, Splash's patterns shifted to what I recognized as their equivalent of a wry smile. Isn't it interesting that the species everyone used to ignore is now being asked to help prevent a galactic crisis? Welcome to the big leagues, my friend, I chuckled. Just remember what I taught you about the burden of responsibility that comes with power. With great power comes great responsibility, Splash quoted perfectly. Though I still don't understand why you attributed such profound wisdom to a story about a human juvenile who was bitten by an irradiated arachnid. That's because you still haven't watched the movies. We'll fix that oversight next time I visit Aquarius Prime. As I ended the communication, I couldn't help but marvel at how far the minnow had come. From the weakest race in the galaxy, to potential peacemakers in a conflict that could reshape galactic society. All because they had the courage to learn from a species that everyone else had dismissed as primitive Deathworlders. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. And sometimes, just sometimes, those lessons can change the course of history. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make. It seems humanity's next great adventure is about to begin. And this time, we're not just teaching others how to fight. We're teaching them how to evolve. The galaxy may never be the same. And honestly, that's probably a good thing. The negotiations have failed, Ambassador Finley's hologram announced, her bioluminescent patterns radiating distress. The Elder Hives have issued an ultimatum to the reformist colonies. Return to traditional hierarchical structures within 48 Earth hours, or face corrective measures. I exchanged glances with Admiral Rodriguez across the emergency briefing room at the Interspecies Training Academy. 2 months of intense diplomacy, and we were still heading toward conflict. What about the Galactic Alliance? Surely they can't just stand by and watch this happen. The Alliance Council is deadlocked, Commander Splash chimed in, his hologram materializing beside Finley's. The conservative faction is arguing that this is an internal matter for the hive minds to resolve. They're afraid of setting a precedent for intervention in species' cultural affairs. Even if that culture is about to tear itself apart? Rodriguez asked, her voice sharp with frustration. The Admiral had spent the last month helping me design training programs for the reformist hives, and I knew she'd grown invested in their cause. Especially then, Finley's patterns shifted to show resignation. The Alliance has always been particularly sensitive about interfering in matters of species self-determination. The irony being, of course, that by not acting, they're effectively supporting the suppression of the reformists' right to self-determine. I leaned back in my chair, mind racing through options. The situation had evolved far beyond what anyone had anticipated when the minnow first demonstrated their new capabilities to the hive minds. What had started as simple curiosity about military tactics had sparked a fundamental questioning of hierarchical social structures throughout the Nexus cluster. The reformist hives, inspired by the minnow's transformation, had begun experimenting with more flexible organizational models. They maintained their hive mind connections but operated with greater individual autonomy, allowing for adaptation and innovation in ways their traditional structure never permitted. The results had been remarkable: increased productivity, technological advancement, even new forms of art and culture emerging from the previously rigid societies. But the Elder Hive saw this as an existential threat. To them, hierarchy wasn't just a social structure. It was the fundamental basis of their civilization. The idea that there could be other ways to organize collective consciousness was heretical. "What are our options?" Rodriguez asked, pulling up a holographic display of the Nexus cluster. Red dots marked the positions of the Elder Hive's military forces, while blue indicated reformist colonies. The disparity was concerning. "Officially, very few," I admitted. "Earth can't intervene directly without Alliance approval, and the Minnow are still technically on probationary status in the Alliance military structure." "Unofficially?" Splash's patterns showed what I'd come to recognize as his tactical thinking configuration. "Unofficially, we've spent the last 2 months training reformist drone pilots in human and minnow combat techniques. They're not as practiced as they could be, but they understand the principles. And they have something the Elder Hives don't," Finley added, her patterns brightening. "Adaptability, the ability to think independently while maintaining collective coordination." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Like the minnow learning to combine their natural abilities with human tactical doctrine. But the reformists are still outnumbered and outgunned." "Numbers and weapons aren't everything," I said, remembering the lessons we'd taught the minnow. "Sometimes the best way to win is to change the nature of the conflict entirely." Splash's patterns suddenly pulsed with excitement. "The Deep Protocol!" I grinned, catching his meaning immediately. The Deep Protocol was a defensive strategy we'd developed for the minnow, inspired by deep-sea predators on Earth. It relied on using environmental factors and coordinated movement to overcome superior forces. We'd never tested it at the scale we'd need for this situation, but the principles should hold. "The reformist colonies are mostly located in the outer reaches of the cluster, near the Dark Matter Nebula," I noted, highlighting the region on the holographic map. "If we could adapt the Deep Protocol to work in nebula conditions, It would give them a fighting chance, Rodriguez finished. But more importantly, it might convince the elder hives that the reformists' new organizational structure has merit. Nothing proves the value of innovation like survival. Over the next 24 hours, we worked frantically to modify the deep protocol for hive mind ships and nebula conditions. The minnow provided technical expertise, while human military advisors helped adapt the tactics. The reformist colonies, through their representatives, eagerly absorbed every detail. When the Elder Hive's ultimatum expired, their fleet moved to correct the deviant colonies. They expected to find disorganized resistance, easily suppressed by superior numbers and firepower. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented in hive mind history. The reformist colonies had positioned their forces throughout the dark matter nebula, using its unique properties to mask their movements. Their ships moved in patterns that seemed chaotic at first glance, but were actually precisely coordinated. Each unit operated independently while maintaining perfect awareness of the overall strategy, a living demonstration of their new philosophical approach. The battle that followed would later be recorded in Alliance archives as the Dance of Darkness. The Elder Hive's rigid battle formations were shattered by attacks that came from seemingly impossible angles, their command structure thrown into chaos by an enemy that refused to behave according to established doctrines. But the reformists didn't press their advantage to destroy their opponents. Instead, they demonstrated the superiority of their approach by systematically disabling the Elder Hive's vessels without destroying them. It was a show of force tempered by restraint, another lesson learned from humans and the minnow. The turning point came when a group of mid-generation hives, watching the battle unfold, broke ranks with the Elder Hives and declared their support for the reformists. The balance of power shifted, and suddenly the conservative faction found itself in the minority. 3 days later, representatives from all hive generations met on neutral territory to begin negotiations for a new social compact. The reformists, now in a position of strength, offered surprisingly generous terms. They didn't want to replace the old hierarchy with a new one. They wanted to create a system that could accommodate both traditional and progressive approaches. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said to Splash as we watched the signing ceremony via quantum link. "None of this would have happened if the minnow hadn't decided to learn from humans. And if humans hadn't been willing to teach us," he responded, patterns showing amusement. "I imagine Admiral Cathax is having some interesting thoughts about his dismissal of primitive Deathworlders and the weakest race in the galaxy right about now." "Speaking of which," Finley interjected, her hologram joining ours. "The Alliance Council has approved fast-track legislation to establish a permanent interspecies innovation exchange. They want to formalize the process of different species learning from each other, with humans and the minnow as founding members." "Complete with a non-interference clause, I assume?" Rodriguez asked dryly. "Actually, no." Finley's patterns showed what could only be described as a diplomatic smirk. "The Council has acknowledged that cultural exchange and evolution are natural processes that shouldn't be artificially constrained. They're calling it the Aquarius Doctrine, after our homeworld." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. The minnow, once dismissed as too weak to matter, had not only transformed themselves but had catalyzed a fundamental shift in how the galaxy viewed species development and interaction. "So what's next?" Rodriguez asked. "The Collective Consciousness Consortium is expressing interest in learning human meditation techniques, and I hear the Silicon Mines want to study human creativity." "One thing at a time, Admiral," I cautioned, though I couldn't keep the excitement out of my voice. "We've got a whole galaxy of possibilities to explore, and this time, everyone's eager to learn from everyone else." "Including humans?" Splash asked, his patterns showing genuine curiosity. "Especially humans," I confirmed. "After all, the moment we think we have nothing left to learn is the moment we stop growing." As I looked at the holographic display showing ships from a dozen different species gathering for the ceremony, I realized we were witnessing the beginning of something unprecedented. A galaxy where strength wasn't measured by military might or technological advancement alone, but by the ability to learn, adapt, and grow together. The weakest race in the galaxy had shown everyone a new way forward, and somehow I suspected this was just the beginning. "Quantum anomaly detected in Sector 7, the automated alert system announced calmly. "Unknown configuration, no match in Alliance databases." Admiral Rodriguez and I exchanged glances across the Interspecies Innovation Exchange's central command center. The facility, newly constructed in Earth orbit, had been operational for precisely 3 months, 4 days, and approximately 6 hours when the alert came in. "Location?" Rodriguez demanded, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "Edge of former Craxthor territory," Commander Splash reported, his aquatic form suspended in a specially designed gravitational field next to the command station. The minnow long-range sensors picked it up first. It's unusual. Define unusual, I said, already pulling up the preliminary data. The readings made my head hurt just looking at them. It appears to be a deliberate manipulation of quantum states. Ambassador Finley's voice came through the comm system. She was currently stationed at the Alliance headquarters, coordinating our response with other member species. But the complexity suggests an intelligence far beyond our current understanding. The anomaly had appeared without warning, a tear in the fabric of space-time that defied our physics models. Initial scans showed it was artificial in nature, but its purpose remained unclear. What was clear, however, was that it was expanding. The reformed hive minds are reporting unusual quantum fluctuations in their collective consciousness, Splash added, his bioluminescent patterns showing concern. They believe whatever this is, it's attempting to communicate, or perhaps scan us. This was precisely the sort of situation the exchange had been created to handle. Unprecedented challenges that required multiple species' perspectives and abilities to address. In the 6 months since the hive mind revolution, we'd made remarkable progress in combining different species' technologies and methodologies. But this was something entirely new. Get me the silicon mines, Rodriguez ordered. We need their quantum computing capabilities, and contact the Collective Consciousness Consortium. If something's trying to communicate, they might be able to help interpret it. I watched as the command center transformed into a hub of interspecies cooperation. The minnow's sensitive detection systems provided detailed readings of the anomaly's structure. The reformed hive minds contributed their unique perspective on its effects on consciousness itself. The silicon mines began processing the massive amounts of data, while the consortium attempted to make sense of the patterns emerging from the chaos. We're detecting something, one of the silicon mind analysts announced after several tense hours. The quantum fluctuations, they're not random. They follow a pattern similar to organic neural networks, but at a quantum level. Are you saying it's alive? I asked, trying to wrap my head around the implications. Not alive in any way we understand, the analyst clarified. But conscious, perhaps? The pattern suggests a form of intelligence that exists primarily in quantum states. That tracks with what we're sensing, a representative from the consortium added. The fluctuations in the hive mind's collective consciousness. It's as if something is trying to understand how our consciousness works by studying its quantum properties. First contact, Rodriguez breathed. But not with a physical species, with a quantum one. The revelation sent ripples through the Alliance. A species that existed primarily as quantum states? The implications were staggering. But more immediately pressing was the question of how to communicate with such an entity. That's when the minnow surprised everyone again. We might have a solution, Commander Splash announced, his patterns showing excitement. Remember how we adapted our bioluminescent communication to work with human verbal patterns? What if we could do something similar with quantum states? The minnow's natural ability to communicate through patterns of light had proven remarkably adaptable when they began working with humans. They'd developed ways to translate complex ideas across vastly different communication systems. Now they proposed to apply those same principles to quantum communication. It could work, the silicon minds agreed after analyzing the proposal. The minnow's experience in translating between disparate communication systems, combined with our quantum computing capabilities and the hive mind's understanding of collective consciousness, might just let us say hello, I finished. What followed was perhaps the most ambitious collaboration in galactic history. The minnow provided the theoretical framework for translation. The silicon minds contributed the processing power needed to implement it. The hive minds offered their experience with non-individual consciousness. The consortium helped structure the actual communication attempts. And humans? We did what we do best. We helped coordinate it all, finding ways to make different approaches work together. The first successful communication came 3 weeks later. The quantum entity, as we came to call it, was indeed trying to understand us. It had detected our various forms of consciousness, particularly the hive mind's collective awareness, and become curious. It belonged to a civilization that existed primarily in quantum states, spreading across multiple dimensions and communicating through what we would come to know as quantum resonance patterns. They've been watching us for some time, Finley reported during one of our briefings. They were particularly intrigued by how different species learned from each other. The minnow's transformation, the hive mind revolution, the formation of the exchange, it all suggested a level of adaptability they found fascinating. So they decided to make contact, Rodriguez mused. But why now? The answer when it came was both troubling and exciting. The quantum civilization had detected something approaching. Something that existed neither in normal space nor in quantum states, but somewhere in between. Something that had encountered other civilizations before, and those civilizations had ceased to exist. They're warning us, I realized, and maybe asking for help? It would make sense. Splash's patterns showed thoughtful consideration. They've seen how we adapt and grow stronger by working together. Perhaps they believe that by combining their quantum-based existence with our physical one, we might all stand a better chance against this threat. And so, barely 6 months after its formation, the Interspecies Innovation Exchange faced its greatest challenge yet. Preparing for a threat we barely understood, alongside allies we were just learning to communicate with. But as I looked around at the various species working together, the once weak minnow, the reformed hive minds, the silicon minds, the consortium, humans, and now our quantum allies, I couldn't help but feel optimistic. Every challenge we'd faced had made us stronger, not just individually but as a community. You know what this reminds me of? Rodriguez said, a slight smile playing on her lips. That first time you proposed training with the minnow. Everyone thought it was crazy then too. And look how that turned out, I replied, watching as a minnow scientist worked with a silicon mind analyst to refine our quantum communication protocols. The weakest race in the galaxy ended up teaching us all something about strength. Perhaps that's the real lesson here. Finley's patterns showed deep satisfaction. True strength isn't about being the biggest or the most powerful. It's about being willing to learn, to change, and to work together. As we prepared to face whatever was coming, I couldn't help but think how far we'd all come. From a simple training program between humans and the minnow, we'd created something unprecedented. A galactic community that grew stronger through cooperation and mutual learning. Whatever this new threat was, it would face not just one species or civilization, but all of us together. Physical and quantum, individual and collective, traditional and innovative, all working in harmony. And that, I suspected, would make all the difference. To be continued.